Katharine, Teen Services Librarian for the Gwinnett County Public Library, and this is our virtual sewing club.
Today we'll be making a small drawstring bag with a squared bottom. You'll need fabric for the outer, lining, and casing pieces. If you don't mind it all being the same color, you can make this out of one back quarter. You'll also need something for the ties. I'm using ribbon. We'll start with the fabric pieces needed for the outside and lining of the bag. You'll need to cut 4 pieces of this size in total. They'll need to be 6 inches wide and 8 inches long. You'll also need to cut a square out of the 2 bottom corners. They need to be at least ½ an inch, but you can go as big as 1 inch. You'll need 2 pieces for your outer and 2 pieces for the lining. Now for the casing. You can make this the same color as your lining or pick something new. You'll need to cut 2 pieces that are 6 inches by 3 inches. We're going to start working with the casing pieces. You're going to fold the short edges over about ½ an inch and press in place. Now repeat for the other side. The next step is to fold the whole piece in half and press it down. Do all of the folding and pressing for your other casing piece too. Now we're going to work on attaching the casing to your outer fabric pieces. You want to start by laying your outer fabric right side up. Next, you want to center the casing piece along the top edge of the outer fabric piece. Make sure you have the raw edges of your casing at the top outside edge and pin or clip it in place. Repeat this process with your other outer and casing pieces. It's time to sew the casing in place. You're just going to sew straight across the top with a ½ inch seam allowance. Okay, now you'll repeat for the other piece. At this point we can start assembling the outer part of the bag. You're going to lay your outer bag pieces down, right sides together, and then pin or clip. When you get to the sewing machine, you're going to sew down both sides and along the bottom. Don't sew in the squares yet, we'll work on that next. Now go ahead and sew the side and bottom edges with a ½ inch seam allowance. Okay, now we'll work on closing up the bottom corners of the outer bag. You're going to pinch and pull the layers apart. You want to line up the side and bottom seams and then pin or clip in place. You'll do the same thing for the other corner too. Now sew those corners across the open edge with a ½ inch seam allowance. Repeat for the other corner. Okay, now we'll start assembling the lining pieces. Lay your lining pieces down, right sides together, and then pin or clip in place. When you get to the sewing machine, you'll sew down both sides and along the bottom. Now go ahead and sew those side and bottom edges with a ½ inch seam allowance. Now go ahead and close up those corners just like you did on the outer pieces. Pinch and pull the layers apart and line up the bottom and side seams. Pin or clip in place and then sew. Okay, so at this point we are going to start attaching the lining bag to the outer bag. The first step is to take your outer bag and turn it right side out. You want to see the fabric that will show on the outside of your finished bag. Now you'll take your outer bag and place it inside the lining. The important thing is to make sure your side seams are lined up and the tops of your bags are even. Go ahead and pin or clip them together around the opening. When you get to the machine, you're going to sew around the perimeter of the bag. This is important. You want to leave this part open. Do not sew here. You need to leave at least a couple inches open so you can turn your bag right side out. Now go ahead and sew around the perimeter, leaving a 2-inch gap open. Sewing in the round can be tricky, so go slow and make sure not to sew all the layers together. So now you'll reach into the gap you left open and pull the outer fabric out. Okay, now you'll tuck the lining inside the outer bag. Okay, so here's the gap. We'll now work to close it by top stitching around the perimeter of the bag. You're going to fold the raw edge of the lining inside the opening and then sew on the bag piece, not on the casing, around the whole bag. I didn't pin or clip mine, but you can if you think it needs it. I'm going to flip my bag inside out so I can see better and make sure I close that opening. Now go ahead and sew. We're sewing in the round again, so make sure not to sew through all the layers or you'll end up with a closed bag. At this point your bag is pretty much done. Go ahead and turn it right side out. Now for the ties. I'm using ribbon and have cut 2 pieces that are 18 inches long. In the future, if you decide to make a larger bag, the way to determine how long to cut your ties is this. You'll measure the top of your bag, which in this case is 6 inches, and double it, which gives us 12. Then add at least 6 more inches, but you can add more if you want your ties to be longer. Here's the fun part, feeding the ribbon through the casing. You're going to attach a safety pin to one end of the ribbon and work it around through both casing pieces. Remove the pin and then tie the ends together. You'll repeat for the other ribbon. This time start feeding through on the side without the knot. You now have a completed drawstring bag.